Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's Performance Talk. I'm Yul Gordon. My partner is Chris Costa. Chris, your good day today?
Good day, yo.
Yeah,
That's a
just
new one. I've
start.
never heard that one from you
Just
before. Good
just
day.
just starting. Yeah, good day. Yeah. How are you?
I'm good, man.
Don't start. Don't start. None won't be none.
All right, little John. Don't make me
No,
so-
man. You got to go back a few more years, man. That's James Brown now. That's get get your music era right.
Yeah, but most of our listeners aren't that age. They aren't going to know that.
Yeah, but he picked that off. But you're talking to me, Chris. You want to introduce our guest today?
By the way, rest poor James Brown's soul. I know it's been a while, but it doesn't seem like it's been that long.
Indeed.
So Jay Dawes, welcome to the podcast, Performance Talk with Yul Gordon and Chris Costa. How you doing?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Doing really well. So thanks for bringing up the music history lesson as well, so I can tell that this podcast is going to be educational on multiple levels today.
You never know, and that's the fun part about it is you never know. We don't know most of the time, so it could come up on anything. Chris, I'm sorry, man. Usually we're going right into the podcast, but did you change spectacles?
No,
same ones. I
Yeah.
must have changed eyeballs then.
Yeah, clear frames, titanium, clear frames. Same ones.
All right. Listeners don't want to hear about your titanium frames, man. Jay, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in this field and what you do.
Oh, man. Okay. So I guess, so currently I'm a professor at Oklahoma State University, and main areas of research are strength conditioning, really mostly in the tactical strength conditioning performance. So mostly honors military and whatnot. But yeah, man, what kind of got me in this whole profession is I was a overweight 13-year-old kid who wanted to play baseball, got cut from the baseball team, and decided, well, if I want to play, I probably need to try something different. So started reading up on strength conditioning and nutrition, and ended up getting to play a couple years in college, which was a good time. But then whenever my second year, I had a injury that kind of ended my playing career. And at that point, kind of realized I actually enjoyed probably training for the season as much as I did actually playing. So that kind of led me into the world of strength conditioning.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of us, whether we call ourselves ex-athletes, former athletes, or whatever, I think, to some degree, we have come to the realization that either from injury, a lack of physical attributes. I don't want to say lack of talent, because anybody that gives an effort to do something along those lines has talent. But also just a very visible willingness to train,
Absolutely.
or to get back at recovery from a young age. I mean, we've talked to a lot of guys, and it's been like, well, when I was young, I got into training, and not every athlete does that. Not every person is into what we do. I know if you're working with first responders and military, throughout my military career, I realized, on the outside looking in, I thought, man, this is, when I joined, I said, hey, this is going to be a culture of, physical fitness, and we can get after it and these kind of things. And then I got into the military and realized, there's really not, unless you intentionally carve out the time, what is done at the unit level or at the sometimes at the larger levels, but what's done is made for the group.
Yeah, for sure.
It's designed for the group, and it's not designed for you as an individual. So if you have some deficits or deficiencies, you better work on them yourself. And my first few years in the military, I struggled with that a little bit, carving out that time, because what we were doing was not enough for me. In fact, I struggled in the program initially.
Mm-hmm.
I struggled in the program because it wasn't what I was used to doing and how I kept myself, where I needed to be. So, at 5 foot and a few inches, 5'4" and a quarter, I always add that quarter in there.
Yeah, of course not. Don't shortchange yourself, man.
Man, not giving it up. But
no pun intended.
Exactly. But you realize, that's when I realized, if I don't do something myself on my own, I can get chunky pretty fast.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing we've seen with military culture, and I don't know what branch you served in, but especially if you look at Army, Air Force, a lot of
Yep.
it is aerobic endurance focused and
Right.
more muscular endurance focused, and it makes sense on one level because it's really easy to implement that style of training without a whole lot of equipment and
Right.
resources and
Right.
stuff like that. So at that level, it makes total sense. But yeah, I mean, to your point, I think that's the challenge is you get, if all you're doing is aerobic based training and muscular endurance training, you get really good at that, but kind of at the expense of everything else.
Right.
So yeah, so that's the challenge is, trying to, really create those ability based training programs that are going to drag the whole group up. Because I mean, as you accurately said, most people shoot to the middle.
Right.
And the fit people tend to get less fit in a lot of areas. The unfit people tend to get better or broke because it was too much for them.
Right.
And the people in the middle usually pull up just a little bit. But yeah, it hasn't in the past what I would consider to be kind of an optimal model. Now, with that being said, obviously there's tons of challenges and implementation. So that's not necessarily a knock. It's just a obvious observation. It's like, well, if you're not training for strength, odds are you may not get strong. So
right. Well, here's the deal. I feel like as a veteran, one of the things that I earned was the right to be able to talk about it and not always in a positive light.
Yeah,
although I wouldn't trade that experience and I wouldn't trade the retirement from that experience, either one. But from a physical fitness standpoint, when I got into the Army, I was like, man, we get up in the morning and we do a few push-ups and we run but these are none of the things that I did habitually to stay in shape. And I wasn't a good runner, but and when I say I wasn't a good runner, I mean I could run for the average person, but for the type of running we were doing in the military, it was almost a 3-year odyssey for me just to change how I looked at the way I was training, and a lot of folks didn't even realize that what my background was. So fast forward from being an enlisted guy to being an officer and having the ability to have a little bit of input in what we did. I didn't punish. I made sure we weren't punishing guys that were just coming into the service but couldn't run 6 miles at PT that morning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because everybody can't. And even I know some great athletes right now. If you looked at them body style wise, they can't run 3 miles.
Right.
They're going to stop and walk and rest and do all kinds of things because they're not trained for that.
Right.
Exactly. But
by default, it's like athletics. I mean, we all have our gifts, right? So,
right.
I mean, if you're a big, strong individual, then odds are you're probably not going to be a really amazing distance runner. I mean, I had one guy one time that says, "Man, I want to get really big and jacked and run a marathon." I'm like, yeah, those two things aren't really
counterproductive.
Consistent as far as goal is. Like one's going to have to suffer at the expense of the other,
or at least counterintuitive anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And I think and that's the whole thing. I think especially in those populations is trying to find that balance. And a lot of times that's what we kind of promote is like, I mean, really, if you look at your soldier, your first responder, they're kind of decathletes, really. I mean, they got to be pretty good at everything all the time. I would argue they probably don't have to be exceptional at any one thing, but they need to have a pretty good, well-rounded fitness so they can do all the different jobs that are necessary. Because, I mean, in reality, you just, in many cases, especially in the first responder space, you just never know what's going to come up.
Right.
So
I'm all for, before we get into, your approach to working with these populations and athletes, I'm all for separate standards for separate jobs. You have your basic standard. Everybody has to pass that to be employed, to be, to work or whatever. Everybody has to pass that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then from there, if you want to be, an elite performer, then you have to be able to meet the elite standards. Yeah. So I don't have any problem with that.
Right. I think most people don't have a lot of problem with like your special teams and the groups that are at a little bit higher levels of performance. I think everybody kind of I mean, everybody, it's a wild generality, but
Right, right, right.
most people understand that you probably need to be more fit to do those types of
Yeah,
jobs.
yeah.
I think the biggest struggle that I've had, I mean, so I've kind of been in this space for, gosh, going on 15, 16 years now, is trying to figure out just what is that minimum standard.
Right,
So, and that's the funny thing. It's not necessarily you're going to go take the best for the job. It's like, okay, how bad can you be and still do it?
right,
So
right.
that's where
Yeah,
it gets
that,
challenging. I guess special teams are a little different. You can be a little bit more
yeah.
selective.
You have to reach. If you're going to be, a ranger or even your job as an infantryman, you have to be here,
Yeah, for sure.
and you have to maintain that. You have to not only pass the basic test, every quarter or whatever it is, but you have to prove to me that you can do this.
Yeah, for sure.
There
Well,
are, there are
and
built-in barriers to entrance. So just it's guaranteed. Not only do you have to pass a physical examination that's significantly stronger observations, but also have to be able to pass those physical barriers too, and the psychological barriers.
Right.
So
yep,
there's definitely a pass of entrance, right, in those most elite operators positions, and it, it's no different than sports in many ways, in terms of how it's approached from an execution standpoint, right? The best executors are going to be the ones that can essentially have foresight, can see things happening before they happen, right?
Mm.
Can think on the fly without overthinking things, right? And then hopefully, in most cases, those individuals also have a natural knack for some sort of physiological or biopsychophysiological connection to separate them from everyone else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, and that's, I had a good friend one time that he always would say that, professional athletes are exceptional at something. So it's not that they're necessarily exceptional at everything, but there's something that makes them unique, that makes them suited for the job. And in a lot of cases, it's not the physical side of it.
right.
Sometimes they understand the situation so well that it just gives them that edge. And I think, Chris, to your point, I think that's the big thing is like just because you're fit doesn't mean you're going to be a good operator, obviously.
Right.
So there's a whole lot more to it. Now, I will say this: it might mean that you may not be able to do certain things that would make you a good operator, but there's so many other things that go along with it, right? And it's funny. I've told this story a couple dozen times now, but with one of our SWAT teams that I work with, so I went out and ran their SWAT test with them, and so I finished second. Now, when I was done, I hurled and
Yeah.
I went home and did it, on my own accord where nobody could see it. So, I mean, I kept some dignity, but
That's all right. So I'm gonna tell everybody about it now.
hey, man, might as well
tell
tell the truth. Might as well tell the truth. It is what it is, but but I mean, to that end of it, I mean, just because I did okay on the physical side, I'm like, I'd be a terrible SWAT officer. Like, that's not me. But
Right.
but I think that's the thing is that, obviously a certain level of physical fitness is going to be important, but it's not the only qualifier because, I mean, we know a lot of really fit people who I would not hand a gun to.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Exactly. And on top of that, I've known some. I've known some guys that up on deployment surprised me
Sure.
at how good they were at the job.
Right.
And they
A percentage on who like the person that is what you would think the outlier versus the idealized person. What would you place the percentage on in terms of the outlier being successful as an operator versus the finely tuned being successful as an operator? If you had to point it out.
Wow.
I guess what I'm getting at is because the outliers probably they're fewer and far between,
Sure.
right? Because those physical attributes are almost essential,
Right.
right? Because
Well,
if
I
you
mean,
don't have the physiological abilities to go out there and we'll say climb a mountain while carrying 50 pounds of gear and then not be completely gassed once you get up that mountain, however you have to get up there, to then be able to execute with precision, right? And exclusive of even think about the Geneva Convention and what your operation duties are. There's just so many pieces, nuances that this sector of the world comparatively and uncomparatively don't associate to athletes, to professional athletes, right?
100%. I think the one thing that you probably can say that's probably similar is like whenever you look at these different performance metrics, they're predictors of success. They don't guarantee it.
Right.
So similar to the sport world, I mean, you may have somebody who's super fast, can jump really high, and may just be terrible when you put them on the field. And it's the same thing. So, I think like, to your point, you're going to have those outliers out there that are exceptional at different things, and maybe the entire job, and then you're going to have those people who are pretty middle of the pack at everything, but because they're pretty good at everything, they're able to attend to a wide range of different tasks and maybe better able to do the job than that person that's exceptional in one specific area. So
and they're predictable. You know what you're going to get. You know when you get, to use Chris's example, this guy's going to be able to carry his 50-pound ruck up the hill and still operate, as opposed to someone who gets up the hill first and the fastest, but then they need 20 minutes to recover.
Yeah, that is the trick. Is once you get there, you still have to do stuff.
Yeah.
Your job's not done. You
right.
just got there.
It's just started.
You're just starting. Yeah. What would you say is in your years of researching these professionals? What would you say is we'll say ideal, not optimal set of skills? Optimal, obviously, we're gonna be talking about so many different attributes for so many different types of operation. Like, if you had to pick a roundabout set of skills that you would say this person will very likely, based on what I've seen in historically, be successful, what would they have?
Man, I mean, probably the biggest. I mean, one, they need to be obviously fit, but probably, I mean, intelligence goes a long way. So it's not just that you're fit, but you know how to use that fitness in the appropriate way. Because, I mean, a lot of times you have people that just go in, they go deep because they can do it. But being able to apply that in the situation, in context, conserve energy, and be able to execute again while keeping themselves under control is really the biggest thing.
Let's break down. Hard to go deep in the red zone.
Fitness and mission. From a fitness standpoint, what particular skills idealize someone in that role?
Yeah, I mean, it's got
to be a blend of a bunch of things, right? But
for sure, if you had to pick that blend. Yeah, in general terms, like first responder space, like mostly those that are better and more like anaerobic performance areas tend to perform better, because if you look at the job, a lot of it is anaerobically driven, right? So strength, quick bursts of energy, even for firefighters who, they're not necessarily sprinting and jumping and things like that on the job. They have to lift heavy things. They have to be able to, have those quick bursts of energy and work at a high work rate for a long or possibly extended periods of time. Probably the anaerobic capacity are going to be even more important in the law enforcement space, especially when we look at essential job tasks for law enforcement. I mean, really, it's when you get right down to it, probably defensive tactics and arrest control is going to be the thing that's going to be the most challenging, I guess, from a preservation of life standpoint. Because I mean, if you have to go hands-on with somebody, that's where that anaerobic fitness really comes in. Now, obviously, you have to have a certain aerobic base to recover from that. But I mean, anaerobic, if you can't sustain that workload, then it puts you in a really bad situation.
It's hard to be gassed in that first 2.5-3 minutes.
For sure.
And then you have another, 3 hours, 6 hours of work to go.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, and I think that's the other thing too. The ability to recover back to almost your pre-gas state. Yeah. Well, I think specifically in law enforcement too. I mean, it's, one of the things that we've told a lot of officers in the past, especially recruits, is like, look, if fitness is not one of the tools that you have, then you're going to go to other more lethal methods because you don't have another option. So, I mean, I would argue that, a lot of times fitness could help prevent some potentially bad situations because, if you can go hands-on with somebody and handle yourself, you're not going to be as likely to go to that secondary option, which again is usually a more lethal option.
Right. And you're not going to mentally from a psychological perspective, you're not going to mentally panic and reach for the fourth option when you should have reached for the second option.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Now you're gassed. You're out there. You went one-on-one for a couple minutes with whoever, and you're gassed. But he breaks away again, or she gets wild and crazy again. What option you're reaching for? I mean, if I feel threatened, then I'm going to the third or fourth option on the scale of escalation.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I think that's the point. I mean, and sometimes it's obviously unavoidable. I mean, it is what it is. It has to happen. But if there's another choice and another way to go about it, then that's usually, our preferred option. But, the job's a hard job for a lot of reasons. So
thinking when fatigued or challenged.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a physical thing too.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, I think that's the thing is from a mental standpoint, when you're fatigued, I mean, your decision-making process is not going to be as crisp and clear as it would be if you got your mental faculties, all there with you. So, I mean, it's like that old saying, fatigue makes cowards of all of us. So it's one of those things where if you experience that undue fatigue, cognitive processing wise, you kind of go into that black zone. You're just not there. So it's more reactionary versus, kind of that thoughtful process that you may want to go through. So yeah, it's an interesting space. And that's the thing, I definitely have a great understanding of the physical training aspects of it, and talking to all the officers and firefighters I've talked to, I understand some of the other aspects better. But the other thing I do want to make clear is I've never done the job. So that's the one thing is I'm certainly not saying that, hey, Jay Dawes knows better than the people that do it. But, in the conversations, these are the themes that tend to keep coming up. So,
well, there are some things that we have all learned working with athletes that directly transfer to the tactical space. And that's one of them. If you're fatigued, your brain is not saying, calm down, you're going to be okay, everything's fine. That's not what your brain's saying. I mean, what you're thinking is something completely different. And I'm not, here to tell everybody what they're thinking or how they're thinking. But if you get to a real fatigue state, I'm not saying you think you're tired, although that's a whole nother thing. But when you get to that state to where you're, you visibly are moving slower, you're not reacting, you're fatigued.
Yeah.
That's and a lot of people, when we talk about training, I talk about this with one of my young guys. I said, right now you think you're tired, so you're tired. Even though I know we haven't done enough for you to be tired.
Right. You're exactly right.
But you think you're tired, and so now all those things to help you control dealing with fatigue, like controlled breathing and all those things. You're panting, you're panicking, you have a certain level of anxiety. And so, you're not going to.
But I think, therefore, I am.
Yeah. There's the philosopher. I'm going to the back room. You take over, man.
It just happened.
Therefore, I am. That's
I get it.
That's perseverance and resilience, right?
Well, that's something we talk to people about too. Is we a lot of times we'll do the subjective ratings where it's like, hey, scale of 1 to 10, where are you at? Well, the reality is that if they've never been at a 10. Do they really know?
Right.
That's the whole part of, I know a little bit more about what SEAL training looks like as opposed to other special units, but that's seemingly what BUDS is all about, pushing someone to the brink of either realizing that they're capable or realizing that they're incapable, right?
Right, absolutely. Well, I'm
either going to be able to do it or not.
Right. I have a good friend who is very familiar, let's say, with that training. And basically, we were talking about, the mental toughness training secrets of the Navy SEALs. He goes, dude, there's no secrets. We just deselect it.
Yeah.
You either have it or you don't. That's the trick. So.
Yeah. It's one of those things where there's no time. You're either selected or you're not. And there's some things that we do, and I'm sure that the SWAT teams are real similar. You might be a great dude. You might show mental fortitude in other areas. You may have the ability to pick a fly off of a wall at 500 meters. But psychologically, if you can't match your physical level of competence with a certain level of psychological backing, or foundation, you're not going to make it.
So you've got exactly two sections. You've got psychophysiological and you've got psychocognitive stressors.
Right.
Where would we place the importance on detriment?
Oh God, yes.
Yeah, explain. Go further, Chris.
Both, probably. Yeah. I mean,
did we lose you? Hopefully he can hear us and he'll come back here in a second. We got to freeze. But anyway, go ahead. You want to try to answer that one, Jay? I'm going to throw it in your lap and be just a great host and run from the
There you go. There you go, man. Well, I mean, I'll let Chris elaborate on it more. But I mean, I think when it gets down to it, I mean, obviously there's different types of stressors.
Right.
That they have to learn how to attend to. And I think that's the challenge is, some of those are going to be, just the fight or flight response that you get from the threat that
right.
maybe, we've seen that heart rates can breach maximum levels when people are driving under lights, like whenever they're in their cars going to scene.
Right.
So, at that rate, I mean, it's not necessarily they're doing anything physical, but they're getting you're getting that adrenaline dump and getting amped up. And, again, that creates a significant stress on the body. And I think, when you look at stress in general terms, I mean, it's complicated, but I mean, it's a pretty primitive response. Like anytime you feel a stressor, it's going to have a downstream effect on a physiological basis.
Right.
And once that happens, it starts this cascade of events where you have to, do the best you can to control your physiology to make sure that you can get back in the right, cognitive framework as well. And, that's where, a lot of the techniques come in where we talk about like your combat breathing or box breathing and trying to, lower heart rate and things of that nature. So Chris is back. There he is.
Yeah. A little issue dipped out on me.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
But
that's go ahead, Chris. Lost you again, man.
No.
Anyway. Are you still there?
Uh-oh.
No, Jay was, did you hear what Jay was talking about? Jay,
nope.
You want to go ahead?
Let's just pretend it was great and we can move on. No, I'm just kidding. But
no, go ahead.
No, so I mean, we're kind of talking about, and I'll paraphrase everything I was talking about. But I mean, basically, when you look at stress, I mean, stress in general, whether it be from a cognitive or a physical standpoint, I mean, it's going to have a lot of the same downstream effects on your physiology. And, we're talking about, with officers driving under lights, like, a lot of times we'll see their heart rates go up to maximum or near max just driving. To get to a incident. And, I think at that rate, being able to control your physiology, with, breathing techniques and, trying to find using a lot of the mental performance techniques that athletes would use actually to help get themselves in, optimal arousal state versus, that heightened state of anxiety where, performance usually suffers. But it's really trying to get them to control their physiology as best they can. Because I'll say this, and this is going to go off on a tangent, but I guess that's why we're here. But there's kind of a common, I guess I don't want to say misnomer, but kind of a common thought process that once your heart rate breaches a certain threshold, that you're absolutely going to get perceptual narrowing of focus and have challenges with your performance. And we've seen operators, at a really, really high level, like at near maximum heart rates. And, again, they could shoot the head off of a match from, 50 meters away. So I think that's some of the research we're getting ready to do is where you look at, what separates those people, right? So those people who can operate at a really high level and can control their physiology when their physiology isn't necessarily in control, I guess, is probably maybe not really a great way to say it, but when they are doing max effort stuff.
Just kind of being able to go from arousal without getting into anxiety.
Correct.
And I think that's, when you think about it like that, at least from my perspective, when you think about, okay, how aroused, how amped up can I be before it's detrimental?
Correct. Well, I think it's just like everybody's going to have a slightly different optimal zone of performance.
Right.
And I guess, probably, and I hadn't really thought about it until this point, but, it's really, what is that bandwidth of that zone, right? So, obviously you're under that curve, but at what level do you get to the point where it all goes in the tank? And again, some people just have a wider bandwidth than others, and they can tolerate it. So, and I think that's those are probably some of the things that you see. To Chris's point earlier, what separates your decent performers from your elite level performers.
Right, and it's everybody doesn't have to be to have a great team or a great unit or a great group of guys. Everybody doesn't have to be at or let's stay with the terminology we've been using. Everybody doesn't have to have the big wide bandwidth.
Right.
You can have guys that okay, he's going to operate under a higher level of arousal, but he's not going to be anxious. And then you have the other guy that's in a different role. I don't want to say what role, but because it could be anything. Mm-hmm. But he's in a different role, and you say, okay, we need steady. I mean, he's not going to get too excited, but we can count on him to be here every time.
I mean, and I think that's the thing is and that's why working as a team and trainings are so important, because you start to understand that, right? I mean, it's again, to use the sport analogy, it's just like practicing with athletes. Like you get your team together, you learn how to gel, you read and feed off one another, and you complement each other's detriments and amplify the strengths. And I think that's the key, really.
Agreed.
Do you think that much like with athletics, we are always striving for game-like situations? Do you think that in the operator set, you can definitely speak to this, that challenge of game-like settings is very difficult to achieve? More difficult than maybe sports.
For sure it is. Yeah. I mean, and that's one thing that we struggle with a lot. During your scenario training, we all know that we can't replicate what's really going to happen in the real world. Because at the end of the day, during scenario training, we know they're going home. The threat is not going to be, it's not going to be significant at that level most of the time. Right. So, there are things that we will do to try to increase stress level, or add like different secondary tasks to different activities, so they have to learn how to process under duress. And even though it's not necessarily exactly what they would do, on the battlefield or in a true operation, it at least replicates some of the physiology and mental and cognitive processes that they have to go through. But to your point, like we've done numerous research studies looking at different fireground training scenarios and active shooter training, and we see some cool data, but we know that that's what it looks like in training. We don't know what it looks like when it really is game on. And we have collected some data, not for research purposes, but on different SWAT teams. And I will say this, the data does seem to be pretty close to the active shooter training stuff that we did, but the situations weren't necessarily active shooter. It was more like, high risk warrant serves and stuff like that. So, again, trying to replicate it one for one isn't really practical, and sometimes it's not even necessarily useful. Now, I will say this, one other kind of a challenge that we have is, a lot of individuals will strive to kind of work out in their gear that they like their PPE, basically. So one place that's pretty common is with firefighters, and we've been seeing that from some of the research that we've done is it causes obvious decrements in performance as far as things like grip strength and mobility. Thermal regulation is terrible in it because
because it is what it is.
Yeah, they're great at protecting you from fire, but they are not good for regulating your thermal stress. Yeah. And so people are working out in that stuff. So it actually in the middle of the workout, they may not be able to push themselves as hard as they could from a physiological standpoint to develop those attributes. They're going to get tired for sure. And I'm not saying you can't get better, because obviously anytime you put load or challenge on the body, that's going to happen. But in some ways, it may be a lot like training in altitude. When you first go train up in altitude, the first few weeks, it's not very conducive because you're just not training in an ideal environment.
Yeah, the struggle is real.
Yeah, and with the gear, I mean, you'll probably get better at training in the gear over time. But I guess the question is, like, are we looking at optimization or are we looking at making workouts harder? And I think in a lot of cases, it's probably just making them harder. I mean, my personal preference would be train hard outside the gear, and then when you get the gear on, life is easier. The other aspect of that too, that is probably also the more significant concern, is if you look at like firefighting gear in particular. I mean, it has known cancer-causing agents that are part of the gear. I mean, even coming from the factory. So there's some really good research come out of Kentucky now, where they're looking at with the when the pores are opened up in those situations, then obviously the skin's going to be more permeable to those different types of chemicals that may make you more prone to certain types of cancers. So it's one of those things. Like, I mean, if you're going to go into a fire, fair enough, right? I mean, that's better than the alternative. You obviously have to train in your gear with your skills so you can get comfortable in the gear. I mean, that totally makes sense. But I wouldn't find additional opportunities to necessarily be in that gear, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
That gear is one-time use too. Supposed to be. Oftentimes it's not the case, but
yeah. Well, especially in firefighting, I mean, you get your gear, and I mean, it's years before they get switched out, and a lot of times they'll have a couple of pair, but yeah, it's they don't switch that stuff out very frequently, I'll say, because it's expensive. It's really expensive.
Yeah, one of the great things about having these types of conversations and covering this side of performance is, as someone who's worked on both sides, or someone who's worked with athletes, you get to see the similarities between in the approaches. Now, some of the training is not going to be the same. It's going to look different. And, you're talking about training with equipment, but one of the things I noticed in specifically the sport of soccer is, man, they like to have the equipment all the time.
Oh, and everything. Yeah.
They don't want to get faster. They want to put the ball in front of them and some obstacles in front of them. Well,
let's do that.
Let's train the components of speed first.
Yeah.
Let's train those components of movement and agility, then put the ball back in the mix and see where the improvements are. But a lot of times, and God love them, because I don't, I love soccer coaches, their enthusiasm and those things about the sport, but get away from the ball sometimes.
Yeah, that's probably in working with soccer. That's I don't want to say the biggest battle I've had, but it's been a big challenge. Yeah, I mean, and I think again, eyeball test. It seems intuitive. If I'm a soccer player and I got a ball and I have to kick a ball, if I have that ball, I'm going to get better with it, which is true. Well, if you're looking at optimizing physical capabilities, you can't do that with a ball, because you're not going to be able to hit those speed windows that you need to really enhance it.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so one of the compromises that I've had in the past is, I've had several coaches that wanted a ball involved with every single drill. And so I finally made the deal. I was like, hey, let me take this day and a half and do only speed work without a ball. And then on this day and a half, I'll do, so usually one day's all speed work. The second day was half day pure speed work and then work with the ball. And then the third one, I'd do the ball completely, and that was fine.
Right.
But basically what I try to do is I kind of segment it to my, light, medium, hard type workout. So the light day was the ball work.
Right.
So basically we can work on some conditioning. We can work on grooving out movement patterns with some basic agilities and things like that. Learn, help you work with the constraints of working, with a ball and trying to move, implements that, aren't part of your body. And kind of do it that way. But again, just give me those couple days where we can work on like just pure speed or pure agility work. So we could go, 90, 100% efforts and develop the physical part that they can transfer over to when they have the ball.
Yeah. One of the things that I used to talk about with the soccer coaches that I worked with was, I said, listen, if the fastest person on your team is not the fastest person with the ball,
right?
That's a skill thing.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Physiological thing.
Right. They need to learn how to handle the ball better and deal with that obstacle and apparatus of the sport. I said, if your best person with the ball is not fast, get them faster. Move the ball out of the way. Let's go work on speed.
Yep,
If they can't change directions, if they can't stop the ball and control the ball, that's usually a combination of, okay, maybe a little more skill with the ball, but a lot of skill with changing directions. Because
it's a blend. It's definitely a blend because there's to have the technical skill, and we see this in hockey all the time. To have the technical skill, and hockey and soccer aren't that different in many aspects.
Right.
In many aspects, they are. So an individual, many are slower than when they don't have the puck. If you get the same speed out of possession that you have without possession, you can be absolutely lethal if you have the technical skills to be able to sustain possession under that higher rate of speed. So you say, okay, if you're slow with the ball, let's go train speed. Yeah, that could potentially lead to an individual with more overall speed, but it doesn't always equate to that individual can acquire and utilize that speed while under possession, right? We have to then build that base of increasing overall velocity or acceleration. And then on top of that, once we've acquired that skill, we then need to apply that skill tactically to the technical, meaning we need to apply it to the ball handling or the puck handling ability. And then that, it's rather cyclical. How long does it take to build speed from a high velocity and acceleration standpoint? And let's not forget about deceleration too. Right. How long does that take? Well, it's going to be different for an individual, right? And if, as to go to Jay's point, are they highly anaerobic? Are they highly aerobic? A highly aerobic person might struggle to achieve that high acceleration. In fact, they may not even have the capabilities to do.
And then there's baseball and softball.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what everybody asks me is, like, were you a college athlete? I'm like, no, I was a baseball player. So I could get away with some skills and I was good. but no, I mean, I think, to Chris's point, I think that's it. I mean, it is that needs analysis, right? So it's that where's your strengths, where are your weaknesses, what are the opportunities, what are the threats to performance here? And, I think from my perspective, more on the strength conditioning side of it, I'm really there to help optimize the physiology part of it. I mean, that's kind of where my sweet spot is. And a lot of times with the technical tactical, that's where I'm going to hand them over to the coach and go like, hey, look,
exactly.
I made this cat faster, but their ball handling skills were terrible. Go make them better at that. But I think, and we kind of use that same process when you're looking at like agility training, right? So, you may have a fast mover or a slow thinker. You may have a fast thinker, slow mover, or you may have somebody that's just terrible at both or really good at both. So I think it's identifying, what type of drills are they going to benefit the most from? Is it going to be ones that are going to be, trying to optimize the physiology, or is it going to be ones where we try and maintain, a certain level of, physiological capabilities and try and add some of those cognitive components to it to help their, perceptual decision-making skills and things of that nature. And, a lot of times when we get on that side of it, again, with the perceptual decision-making, that's where I lean really heavily on the sport coach.
So with that in mind, we have a wide receiver, and this is hypothetically, and the coach wants him on the field because speed kills.
Sure. When it does.
And when it does. He's the fastest guy on the team. He could be a track athlete. He's borderline world class at sprinting. 1, he can't change directions, and 2, he can't catch.
Yeah, for sure. Those are really important skill sets. Yeah.
But the coach comes to you as the strength coach and says, I want him on the field. Operator, this guy is, I mean, he thinks well, he moves well, he's always there, he doesn't get too high or too low. He's everything you want him to be. Sure. But he can't hit the broadside of a barn from 25 feet.
Right.
with anything.
Right. Throw the gun at it. I don't know.
So it's who, is that the strength coach's responsibility? Of course, we say no.
Right.
But the skills coach says, well, you're making him too tired, or you're doing too much of this. So when it comes time to catch, he's not focused. Well, Is that a
For sure, but I think, and that's where I think that communication process goes in, where you go like, all right, coach, what are you doing with him today? So I have an idea of how much I can push him over here to make sure that we're balancing those stressors out. And like I said, that sounds really good in theory, and there are times there's times where it works out great, and if you've got that relationship, it does. But then inevitably you're going to have at times like, oh crud, coach kept us an extra 30 minutes, and I'm smoked. It's like, all right, well, my program just went out the door, and I'm going to have to adjust to that.
Yeah,
but I think that's the key. Is like I think we're based off our understanding of the physiology, it probably, as much as I hate to say it, a lot of the onus is on us to be able to recognize that and make the adjustment. Because
that adjustment's pretty easy, though.
It should be,
right?
Yeah, I think
pretty easy to adapt programming.
Yeah, I think a lot of times what ends up happening is strength coaches get that pressure put on them by your other coaches to do a certain job or to do training a certain way,
right?
And and it's not necessarily a comfortable situation pushing back on that. And I think a lot of people have to kind of sweat even being able to maintain their job. But I mean, I think that is the challenge. That you got to be able to have those difficult conversations. And I mean,
right,
as hard as it is, you got to tell the truth. And people may not always like it, but again, there's a certain reality that goes along with it. And and as I said before, like I don't claim to have that balance, because I've had so many students come up to me and goes like, oh, I'm working with this coach, and this is a situation. Well, how do you create the buy-in? How do you get them to listen to you? I'm like, well, I mean, you do the right things, and sometimes they still don't. Right. So it's just like, it's relationships. Relationships are messy, man. So you keep trying. Try to be a good person. Be kind about the feedback, and just try
let's take that truth, and then you segued into students and all that. Let's talk about the education part in the profession a little bit. We know that the youngsters coming in today, they're much different than when I entered the profession. Absolutely. I mean, that was Barney Rubble and Fred Flintstone, if you know about those guys. But even different from when you guys started in the profession.
For sure.
So what do you tell students today? Besides, you alluded to a little bit of it with relationships and building those relationships. But what do you tell them about, realizing that your degree, no matter what level it is, has just afforded you the opportunity to now come into the profession and start learning?
Yeah, I mean, and
your learning has just begun. You when you walk into that building, you don't know everything that you need to know.
Exactly. It's like you just shut up and ask where the bathroom is and just observe for just a little bit. So, but yeah, I mean, and to that end, I mean, I'm pushing 48. So, when I started out, I mean, dude, so my undergrad degree was actually in business admin, because they didn't even have exercise science at the university I was at. And so it
wasn't even a thing when I graduated.
No. So basically I took my business admin and basically got the equivalent of a PE minor. And then I transferred to Oklahoma State and did human performance and stuff like that. But, man, I think that is one of the key differentiating factors. Like, back in those days, I actually had to go to the library and pick up books, which, a lot of the listeners may not know what those are, but there's libraries.
That's true, right? They buildings with stuff in there.
Yeah, and we had to go to it if we wanted to know stuff. But I mean, that was the thing. It wasn't as accessible. So, now, they literally have a device in their pocket that gives them access to pretty much every piece of training information in human history.
And the latest research for the most part.
TikTok, but that's another story. But yeah, I think in general terms, the ones that have a passion for it, the students I would say they consistently get more or brighter about their knowledge level as far as like with different training techniques and even periodization models and things of that nature. I think the big struggle is the application of it. And I think, like you said, getting a degree will demonstrate that you've got a minimum level of competency that should get you in the door to have a chance at being successful in this profession. But and the hard reality, man, and God, my university would kill me for saying this, so we may edit, but the bad thing about it is that you walk in, you kind of know who's going to make it and who's not.
Yep.
And it's one of those things where, you don't want to tell them, you might want to rethink this, but sometimes, you might want to rethink this. If you don't have
that's kind of the ability to accept the truth.
It is. It's not for everybody. And that's the reality of it. It's not an easy road to hoe. It's very doable, But
if you have advisees, it's essential that you do that. I mean,
right.
You can get as mad at you as they want to regarding enrollment, but at the end of the day, your job is to, in many ways, facilitate the student, facilitate their success, but not give them success. And I think that's where academia gets a little crossed up, is they get a little too focused on giving success instead of leading the horse to water so that the horse can drink.
For sure.
It's the horse's responsibility to drink.
Yeah, and Chris, and that's one of the things, I mean, I'll always tell them, like, hey, I can open up doors for you, but you got to walk through them. And I think, and then it's your job to stay there, because I can't do that for you.
Yeah.
The second part of that is, like, I'm really adamant about it's my job to teach you how to think and not necessarily what to think.
Exactly.
Exactly. I think that's the one thing is, like, I mean, honestly, like, man, I might be wrong. I like what I do, and I feel like I have a pretty good product when I teach it. But I'm like, you know what? You can challenge that. But I mean, if you think I'm wrong, prove me wrong. That's great. Do that. But you're going to have to dig into it. You're going to have to do the work to.
With a lot of would-be strength coaches want to be trainers and folks that, I get a lot of, I disagree with that. Okay. And that's my response is like, okay. I said, why?
Yeah.
Why do you disagree? Well, on the internet, I said, bring me something a little more.
Yeah, a little more than that.
Yeah.
Do you disagree because it's wrong, or you disagree just because you don't like it?
Yeah, if you don't like it, fine. Yeah. If you don't like it, that is great. But there's a lot of things that other coaches do that I won't do. But it's not because they're wrong. It's because that's not my alley. That's
communication.
Yeah.
Someone that says they disagree because they don't like it isn't communicating effectively. Just say, I really don't like doing this. I don't like taking exams. Okay, but you still have to. So how can we
how do we work around?
I don't like squatting. I don't like to squat. Okay, so there are many things that we can do outside of squatting, but keep in mind that squat axle. Yeah. So
you want to get this much stronger in your lower body this fast. And we have one exercise that can facilitate that the best and get you where you want to be the fastest, but you don't want to do it.
Yeah, but we have alternatives and we can work around that. Is
there
it
you go.
Ideal? No, it's not. It doesn't have the same potential in many cases, not in all cases, but nonetheless, you can still get an effective outcome.
For sure. Well, I think that's
probably take more malleability.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the debate comes into the area of strength conditioning. Because, I mean, to some extent, it all works. It's really about what's best and what's best in the situation, what's best for the individual, what's best based off the constraints that you have and what you're dealing with. Because, I mean, man, we talk about it all the time, especially in that tactical space. Is like, what's the better bad choice? Because there's not a good option. And so out of all the bad options that we have available, this is the best thing that we got, so we're going to run with that.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes that's the side of the ledger you're working on.
Yeah, for sure.
You're not working on it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, this goes back to the research geek side of me, but we were doing we submitted a paper one time where we did body composition, 3-site body comp for over 170 officers. And the feedback was like, well, DEXA would have been better. I'm like, yep. Sure it would have. I can't argue that point. So
don't have it. So
are we good or not? I don't know. I mean, I can't haul a DEXA down to the police station because it's the size of a Buick. So that's what we could do. And I mean, so it's funny. Like, I think also probably a lot of times in our space, like, people try to be maybe a little bit too clever sometimes with things. Because, I mean, bottom line, blocking and tackling wins games. I mean, if you're really good at basics, that's going to hit 90% of what you need to do.
Thefoundational stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the thing. Like, the older I get, probably the less sexy my training is, because it's just like, there's a lot you can do. But, if I know that this is going to hit 90% of it, then some of these other things that are more exotic is just more stuff. And sometimes, I'll throw that stuff in to, just motivate people a little bit. But, again, if you look at effectiveness, like, again, the basics work.
It's like height and weight, BMI, and measurements and taking measurements in in the military. Those things do they give you good indicators? Yeah. Are they the best choice? No. But
Right.
for 400,000 people,
And that's exactly it.
And to be able to execute that,
Yeah.
and get some kind of reasonable, data.
Yeah.
Then okay, but
Does
a BMI really tell you is a guy fit? No.
Nah, but I will say this: the one thing it does open up the door for some pretty honest conversations.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
if I see a first responder and their BMI is 26 and 27 and they're working out, they're probably fine. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, especially that's when you can use a legitimate eyeball test. You can say, okay, this guy's shoulders look like two hammers, and
exactly.
his waist is about 33.
Yeah, it's like you're not going to be okay,
like a tree trunk. Yeah, I'm not going to worry about you.
Yeah. Now, I will say this. Yeah, most of the time, the closer they get to 30, unless they have a real enthusiasm for resistance training.
Yeah,
it tends to be not too far off. So
yeah, here's what I've always said. If it's 20 to 25, look at the individual.
Yeah.
If the BMI is 25 and under, let's just say it that way. But usually nobody's too worried until it's over 20.
Right. Oh yeah. I mean,
if you start inching up and you're staying at 26, 27, and every time for the last 9 months we do a test every 3 months, and you come in and your BMI is 26, 27. Before that thing starts to creep up, buddy, you might want to, because there's probably some changes to the body that are visible too. That's right. The thing.
That's why DEXA and Bod Pod are so good.
Right.
I mean, and I would even argue like 26, 27, like most of the time. I mean, even a mesomorphic or endomorphic individual, if you're strong, that's probably about right, honestly. Yeah. Now, again, if you're closer to 30, it tends to be a little bit less muscle, unless, again, you are really spending a lot of time doing it. Now, again, that's pretty anecdotal, but
and even for my example there, that was pretty. I wouldn't bet any money on data outcomes on what I said being true for that. I'm just saying, there's such a thing as when you look at a guy, you can go, okay.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Or you look at a young lady and she's 5'10" and she's really muscular. You don't automatically go, okay, your 30 is you're obese. Well, does she look obese? No, not really.
Right. Yeah. Common sense is not common practice, though.
Not always.
It was funny when we were doing some recruiting for a law enforcement agency, and we had literally hundreds of people come in to get recruited. And so we did a push-up and a beep test assessment, and literally had people lined up to the other side of the gym when people run at the beep test. And I'm sitting there watching it, and after a while, you could pretty well start guessing, like, all right, they're going to fail out about this number. Like, there's no way they're getting past that.
Yeah.
But then as I started looking closer around the room and looked at who was applying, I'm like, dude, you could probably alleviate maybe half the people just by saying, do I feel comfortable handing that person a gun?
Right.
Regardless of anything that's about to happen next, it's like, just the eyeball test tells me this may not be a great situation.
Yeah. And every test they do after that proves you're right.
Yeah,
that's when it's scary. That's when it's scary.
Yeah,
I'm not a big believer in the eyeball test. Always bring me the data, especially when you're dealing with people's lives and livelihoods.
For sure.
But I trust my eye. Doesn't mean I'm not going to test you or I'm going to reject you. Just means I've seen a whole lot of people that at 5'5", 200 pounds struggle with this.
Right,
and at 5'4" 1/4, 190 pounds, I didn't really struggle with the beep test and stuff like that. But I didn't also my history was completely different than the other folks.
Sure.
And when we were standing side by side, you could look at the eyeball test and you could go, okay, we need to let both run. I've also seen some guys and young women surprise you. they look like they can't do something.
Oh,
that's why
sure.
that's why you test everybody.
Yep, absolutely.
Regardless of what you think, they get to go through as well.
Yep, absolutely.
And I'm happy to be proved wrong whenever I have a foul eyeball test.
There you are.
So Jay, man, I'm looking up at the clock now. We just went over an hour about 5 minutes ago. That's because it went so fast and nobody was paying attention. We appreciate you taking the time to come on. This was a very good conversation. Definitely want to have you back in the future to catch up with what you're doing and those kind of things. So if you hear from us, don't big time me, man.
It would be an honor, guys. I appreciate the opportunity. It's great talking to y'all.
All right, Chris, you got any final questions or statements?
Well, thanks again on us to Gordon and Chris Costa. Today's guest was Jay Dawes. We'll see you again real soon.
And we are